All praise belongs to Allah, and peace and blessings be upon His final messenger. In the last episode, we mentioned the terrible consequences it had when the Prophet Muhammad SAW and his companions, they went public with the da'wah to Islam, with calling people to Islam. And we gave examples of that, and we mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad SAW, as a means to counter this torture that they were going through, that he sent a group of his companions, and it was a small group at that time, to Abyssinia. And this was because the Prophet Muhammad SAW, through the revelation, knew that there was a ruler there that was just. And subhanAllah, this is as well from his proofs of prophethood. So he said that there in Abyssinia, there is a just ruler who under his kingdom, no one is done injustice to. So we mentioned that the small group went there, and that they did not stay long because they heard the message, the false news basically, that the Quraysh had become Muslim, and this actually was not the case. So they returned just to find out that the situation had actually not changed, but the same enmity and everything was there, and obviously this was a shock for them. But not soon after, the Prophet Muhammad SAW sent a second group of the Muslims, and this was in the fifth year of the revelation. Like we said, the revelation came down 3 years. There was this da'wah in secret, in quotation secret, because the Quraysh used to see this, but it was not confrontational da'wah. And then 2 years, the da'wah was confrontational, where they talked about the idols, they called publicly to Islam, they went to the Kaaba, and this is where they were attacked. And this is as well where the small group went to Abyssinia and came back during these 2 years. And in the 5th year, the Prophet Muhammad SAW, he sent a bigger group of Muslims now, because they had grown already, to Abyssinia for a second time, for what is known the second migration to Abyssinia. And they were around 100 people, and most of them were men, but there were a big number of women as well. Like I think there were around 80 men and 20 women, something like that, fleeing from Mecca, fleeing from this persecution and trying to find safe haven in Abyssinia. And yes, subhanAllah, it is said that one of the prominent figures that was with them was Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. And Ja'far was the son of Abu Talib, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, that he grew up with, like basically his cousin. And yeah, it is said as well, some of the historians, the Muslim historians, say that Ja'far was the leader of this group basically. And Ja'far plays a big role anyways later in the story. So they go to Abyssinia and they get refuge in the kingdom of this king, this just king. And no one bothers them at first, until the idolaters find out that this big group of Muslims, like it was, they weren't in a big city like we live in these big cities today, where if 100 people disappear, no one notices. I mean, this was Mecca and everyone knew the other person. So when 100 people went away, they sneaked out, they fled, they were able to escape. It became noticeable to the idolaters, and they did not want, like they wanted to defeat Islam before it could spread, before it could get out to and reach like other fertile soil where it could grow and prosper basically. So they came up with a plan. They sent 2 of their men, and this was Abdullah, one of them, his name was Abdullah, and the other was Amr ibn al-As. And Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah, they took a big amount of presents with them, and they went behind the Muslims, like they followed the trail of the Muslims to Abyssinia. And the plan was to bribe the ministers and the people around the king, so they would support them in convincing the king to send the Muslims back to Mecca, so they can imprison them, torture them, and even kill them. And Allah knows best what they would do to them if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not have a better and more mightier plan in place for what happened after. So the 2 mentioned men from the Quraysh, they arrived in Abyssinia and they started bribing the people around the king. And then eventually they went to the king. They asked for an audience with the king for an important issue, and they had already made it easy for them to get access to him through this presence and stuff. And the king came. He was ready to talk with them, and they said, "Look, king, we don't want to bother you." They started praising him and stuff, and he said, "But there are these idiots," and they mentioned this word. "There are these idiots from our people. They're very mischievous, and they came up with a new religion, and they are making corruption in the land. They're causing for corruption in the land, and we don't want for your land to be corrupted," and things in that sense. "So please give them back to us, like let your guards take them into custody and take them into, like put them in shackles or something, so they can send them back with us to Mecca, where we can treat with them in justice," basically. This was what they were claiming. And there was a sense of agreement, a feeling of agreement from the people around the king, because they had been bribed already. So the king, subhanAllah, and this is from the beauty of the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the king indeed was a just ruler that would not be satisfied with injustice happening under his ruling. And he was a Christian ruler at that time. And subhanAllah, when he heard that, he said, "No problem, but I will not be able to give them to you before I hear them out. And if it's the case that there are idiots and mischievous and things that you're mentioning, then I'm more than happy to send them back with you, because they're causing trouble and you can deal with them in justice. But if they are not, and you are unjustly wanting to take them back and do injustice to them, then I cannot let that happen." So the Najashi, he called, and Najashi's name was Ashama. It is said in the books of Seerah. And Najashi was more of a title, like Najashi was the title for the Abyssinian king, and his real name was Ashama. And basically he called for the Muslims to be brought, and they were brought, like a group of them, and their leader was Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Like we mentioned, he will play a big role. And Ja'far, subhanAllah, when they were requested, when they were on their way, they were talking with each other, like the Sahaba, they were talking with each other. And this is a point that I'm gonna expand on later in the story. But someone asked, "Well, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna tell this king?" And they agreed that we will only tell him what Allah and His Messenger have taught us. Like, we will not go outside of that. If they ask us anything about, we will be basically brutally honest, and we will present the things as they are. So subhanAllah, they go, they have the audience with the king and everything, and the king talks with them. And what An-Najashi Ashama, what he actually said is, "I hear that your people are complaining against you, and I hear that you neither are in the religion of your people, nor are you in my religion. Like, nor are you Christians, nor are you Jews, nor are you idolaters of Mecca, nor are you fire worshippers. Like, what is this religion that doesn't resemble any of the religions of the people? Like, what is this?" And subhanAllah, Ja'far, he did a very nice speech. And I would advise everyone who's looking at this episode now that he later reads this speech for himself, because it's a very, very powerful speech. And I will put it in the information of this video. But basically what Ja'far did rhetorically, he started describing to this king the state of this Sahaba, before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came to them with the revelation. So he said, "We used to be a people of idol worship, and a people of gambling, and a people of fornication, and doing immoral things, and doing this and doing that." And so he's mentioning all the evil things, like we mentioned, we talked about that, I think, in the second episode of the series, all the evil things that were spread, and the ignorant things that were spread in this society of theirs. And then he said, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to us a messenger. And then this messenger, like, he taught us this and this and this and this. And then subhanAllah, he mentions all the good things to Islam, like worshipping one God alone without partners, being good to the parents, being good to your neighbors, like being fighting for justice. And he mentioned a lot of things, but in a very beautiful way. Like, subhanallah, he gave a very beautiful speech. And until I think it was Amr again, who said, ask them what they say about Isa, Jesus alayhi salam. Because they wanted to create a point of conflict now. They were upset that their lies were being exposed, so they wanted to try to create a point of conflict between the Muslims and the king now, to find something to so that the king don't take them in, basically, because the things weren't looking good after the speech of Ja'far radiallahu anh. So the king said, what do you say about Jesus, about Isa alayhi salam? And subhanallah, Ja'far radiallahu anh, he started reciting the first verses from Surah Al-Maryam. And while Ja'far is reciting these verses and he's talking about Zakaria and then the mother of Isa alayhi salam, Maryam, and he talks about Jesus, Isa alayhi salam himself, and how he came like birth from a virgin mother, and how he spoke to the people, being a baby, being an infant, and mentioning all these stories. Subhanallah, the king, Ashama, the Najashi, the king, the Ethiopian Abyssinian king, he started crying. They said he cried so much that his beard became full of tears. And he said, you are secure. I will not give you back to those people to do anything to you. And he was touched from them, and he basically sent them away and said, just go and you're safe. But it was not over yet, subhanallah. So the Muslims go and the non-Muslims go. They were still all in Abyssinia. The Muslims had a point of relief where they were like, Alhamdulillah, Allah helped us, made it easy for us. And maybe some of them said, Alhamdulillah, it was not mentioned to Ashama that we actually don't share what they are saying about Jesus, about Isa alayhi salam. Like, we don't say that he was the son of God. And this was not mentioned in these verses. This was not clear in those verses, because it was clear through other verses that they did not recite then. So they were like relaxing, and they were basically happy of what happened, that the idolaters could not take them back, subhanallah. But the idolaters were not satisfied yet, and they wanted to put out more effort. So one of them said, by Allah, tomorrow I will go again and meet the Najashi, the king. And this time I will tell them their problem, their big problem that they're having, that's going to create the conflict. And even the other idolater, he was like, his heart was a bit softer, and he said like, come on, man, it's not worth it anymore. They have families and we have families, so they have even families there. Let's just go back and tell them it didn't work out, the plan didn't work out. And he said that, no, wallahi, I will tell them that they're claiming that Jesus, that Isa alayhi salam, is a slave. This is what he said. I will tell them, they would say Isa alayhi salam is a slave. And you have to imagine, for someone that sees Jesus as the son of God, no, saying he's just a slave and messenger, subhanallah, this can be quite shocking and disturbing, depending on what kind of person that is, and if he is ready to change his belief or not, if being proven that this is actually something problematic, because it is problematic to claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a son, subhanallah. But this is a whole other topic. I don't want to open and go into this topic here. But yeah, subhanallah, it was in that situation, it was not an easy thing to happen, that this thing is being brought up before this king. So, and the next day they go again and they meet the king again, and the king says, what do you want, basically? And they mention to him that these people that you're protecting, they say something about Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, that is not good. They say something bad about him. They say he is a slave. And subhanallah, they called the Muslims back again, and Ja'far and the group and everything. And he said, what do you say about Isa? And then subhanallah, Ja'far, he looked at the king and he said the truth. He said, we say that he is a slave and messenger, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him his word, and he started describing Jesus as he is described in Islam, not adding to it something that is not from Islam or leaving out from it that something Islam said. This is very important. So in this moment, this was the moment where everyone is scared, everyone is nervous, subhanAllah. The king takes his hand and beats the ground with his hand. And then he takes his staff and he stands up or something. He comes like closer to them. And he says, basically what he says is that Jesus was not more than what you said, basically. He agreed to them. And subhanAllah, at this moment when the king said this, the people around them, the ministers and the people who had been bribed as well, but not because of being bribed, but because this was like a word of disbelief in Christianity for them. If you say that Jesus was not like beyond what you said, basically, that he was not the Son of God, this was the conclusion of the saying. So they were upset, and I say, if you want to be upset, but you, as for you, like for the Muslims, you're free to stay. I will protect you. I will make sure that no harm comes to you, and you can prosper and live in my lands as you wish. And subhanAllah, there are multiple things we want to break down here before we want to continue with the series. The first thing and the most important thing is how Ja'far and the Muslims, they dealt with the situation in a way that they did not compromise their religion just in order to be safe or in order so no harm comes to them. And this is a lesson, a very important lesson for us Muslims around the world, because how many of Muslims we see who are involved in da'wah, who are involved with everyday lives, with non-Muslims, and they hide their religion, they sugarcoat their religion, they water down their religion because they feel that they will be harmed if they present the religion as it is, or they fear that the people will have a bad view on the religion if they present the religion as it is, and they try to please the people by leaving things away from the religion, adding things to the religion, trying to make the religion look in a certain way other than it was intended to look. And this is a big problem. And there was no worse situation than the situation Ja'far and these 100 Muslims were in. And if you would say that there could be any justification for doing this, for changing the religion to a benefit, then surely they would have precedence in being able to change the religion for this sake. But they did not, because they know that this is exactly 100% against what Islam came to do. Islam came to free the person from the shackles of the creation. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when Islam came, Allah tells the people that I am your Lord, worship me, don't worry about the idols, don't worry about the people. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even told his prophet, like, go convey the message, I am protecting you. And a lot of different verses that the believers will be victorious, the believers will be under the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, he will test them, and this is part of, subhanAllah, the test of this life and achieving the ranks and earning paradise, basically earning Allah's mercy and through that earning paradise. But yeah, subhanAllah, the idea that we start pleasing people and changing the religion of Allah to please people or to avoid harm from ourselves goes fundamentally against the Islamic creed. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions multiple times as well that fear and love, ultimately, like the greatest fear and greatest love should be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this moment, and if we come to a stage where we start changing our religion out of fear for people, either out of fear or either out of love, like out of fear, for example, if you want to avoid harm, we fear that they could harm us, or out of love, because we think that, oh, maybe if I change the religion, they will be more attracted to Islam. We actually have put in the fear and the love aspect over the fear and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like I said, if there was any justification that would allow this to be done, then it would be allowed in this situation, but it was not, as we've seen. And subhanallah, they said the truth and no harm came to them. But even if harm came to them, they would not change. Like subhanallah, we mentioned before how Muslims were tortured, and this is something I forgot to mention in the last episode, I think. And this is the point, that from all these stories that you're hearing from these Muslims that being tortured, that being put in under this severe persecution, that are being killed, and all these cruel things that you're hearing, there is not one report that one of them left Islam, subhanallah, from these sabiqun al-awwalun, from these early Muslims. And this shows like how the faith was deeply rooted in them through the education of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they were not changing the religion or making it tasty for some people, subhanallah, in that sense. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, he was clear in his opposition to the idolaters. So this is the point that we wanted to expand upon a little bit, that we should learn from Ja'far radiallahu anh, that whatever the situation is, we present the religion as it is. And Islam says, subhanAllah, the scholars have said that from the intentions from the priorities of Islam is basically, the first priority is hifz ad-din, the perseverance of the religion. That the religion is being preserved has the highest priority in Islam. And subhanAllah, they even say like other things, like that the bodies are being preserved, like that the people are being preserved, comes under the perseverance of the religion. So it's more important that the religion stays preserved than individuals or people stay preserved. And this is why you sometimes see scholars in Islamic history telling the truth about Islam and being killed for it or being imprisoned for it. Through the history of Islam, subhanAllah, we see this, and they're being persecuted and a lot of bad things being done to them because they were saying the truth. In times of where the religion was starting to be changed, like we have the great story with Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, subhanallah, and he was a scholar who refused to say some bad deviant beliefs about the Quran that were present like in the leaders of that time. So he was being persecuted, he was being punished, he was being tortured in a horrible way. But he did not do this because he was seeing this as being like extra good or something, but he mentioned that he was seeing this as something obligatory, because if he as a scholar would not defend the religion in that situation, the preservation of the religion would be in danger in the eyes of the people. Like people's view on the religion would change to a deviated view because they were seeing the scholars of the religion like not opposing this view. And this is why he took all this pain upon his body, subhanallah, and put emphasis on, or put his efforts on, preserving the religion, because that was more important and the higher priority of Islam. So subhanallah, this is in this story of Ja'far radiallahu anhu, we have a great example of this, I think. But yeah, in regards to Najashi, Ashama, this king, maybe some of you, they wonder what happened with him. He actually became Muslim, subhanallah. He became Muslim after this. But it is said that it was impossible for him to openly make his country Islamic. And this is because there was too much opposition. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't give a soul more to carry than it can bear. And subhanallah, inshallah, he is not held accountable for something he could not do. He had not the means to do so. And subhanallah, it's even narrated that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that when he passed away, because subhanallah, Ashama, it was very interesting. He passed away, although he became Muslim in this time where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was still there, but he passed away before he could see the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And it is said that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed over him, like when we Muslims, when we pass away, we have this Salatul Janaza, we pray the prayer for the deceased person, that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed the prayer for the deceased, but in absence, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ prayed it in Arabia and Medina, I think. And he still made the prayer for him, showing the status of this not companion, maybe it's called tabi'i. Tabi'i means the people who met the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and did not meet the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself. And so after this incident, the idolaters basically failed to retrieve the Muslims from Abyssinia. They had to leave, and the Muslims could stay in peace there until later they would migrate back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But we will come to that inshallah. But yes, in the next year, like we said, this was in the 5th year after the revelation. In the 6th year after the revelation, something big happened again. And subhanallah, if I mention maybe the incident without its consequences, then you may think, okay, how big can this incident be? Like, how it doesn't sound that the consequences were big out of this. But when I mention what came out of this, what happened, then you will see that it was indeed a big incident. And this was that 2 people became Muslim. They changed the conditions of the Muslims, like in that environment where they were being persecuted. Like, we have to say, like, not all Muslims went to Abyssinia. A lot of Muslims were still there. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was still there. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was still there, and his story is a funny story. I think I can mention it here as well. He was on his way to go to Abyssinia as well with the Muslims. Like, I think he was late and he wanted to like go to them after. And he met one of the idolaters, like one other guy that used to know him and that used to respect him. So this idolater asked Abu Bakr radiallahu an, where are you going? And he was like, yeah, I'm going to Abyssinia because I need to migrate because my people are exiling me, and yeah, they're persecuting me, and I basically cannot stay here anymore. And this idolater, like, the tribal pride like entered him, and he was like, someone like you, like someone honorable like you, cannot be exiled from his country. He says, I will go to them and I will tell them basically that I will give an oath or something. I will give a saying that under my oath you can stay, and that they're not allowed to basically harm you in any way. And Abu Bakr said, okay, if you want to do that, then you can do that. And this is very interesting. These are like this idolater is going to this other idolaters, convincing them that you cannot kick this person out. Under my responsibility or under my honor, he's going to stay in Mecca. And if you do anything to him, you're going to have a problem with me. So subhanAllah, this idolater, he goes and he tells us to Quraysh. And the Quraysh, they agreed because these kind of things were kind of sacred to them. Like this kind of giving your word and putting someone in your protection. So they kind of did not agree in the sense that they were happy with this, but they agreed in the sense that we cannot do anything about that. We don't want trouble with this other tribe and with this other person, and he's an honorable person to us, like this other idolater. So they said Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he came back to Mecca, and subhanAllah, what he did is, I think something they said is he was not allowed. Yes, he was not allowed. This is what the Quraysh, they told this person who mediated. He said he can come back, but he's not allowed to go to our women and our children and our people like in front of the Kaaba and recite the Quran and calling them to Islam. So he said, if he doesn't do this, he can't come. So Abu Bakr comes back, subhanAllah, and what he does is he builds a micro mosque in his home. Like he took his place in his home and he built like a small praying area for himself, and he starts reading the Quran. Like most of the time, subhanAllah, he starts praying and reading the Quran, and he was reading so much. And he was one of the companions, it is said that when he was reading, he used to cry from like the emotions that used to come to him. He was being touched by the Quran and he was reading in an emotional sense and crying, and he was raising his voice when he was doing this. And subhanAllah, it is said that the children and the women of the Quraysh, of the idolaters, they used to come around this place to hear Abu Bakr recite. And this made them crazy. Like this basically made them crazy, and they went back and forth to this other idolater that mediated. They said, please, you cannot do this. Like at the end they told them, look, you have 2 options. Either you stop protecting Abu Bakr, like you raise your protection from him, or you tell him that he stops like reading the Quran, stops raising his voice, he stops with these actions. And eventually they convinced the person to go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and to tell him, look, they have put pressure on me. You have two options. Either you stop doing this, or I cannot protect you anymore. Like, you're causing for me trouble right now. I wanted to help you. Now you're causing trouble for myself. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he, subhanallah, he very easily said, I go out of your protection and I go to the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, subhanallah, this was basically the reason that Abu Bakr did not end up in Abyssinia, and then he stayed in Mecca with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and with the situation that we're gonna look at now, inshallah, further. But basically, yeah, we made a little detour here, but we want to go back now to this incident that you mentioned, that two persons, they converted to Islam, that changed the situation of the Muslims to the better, in a sense. Subhanallah. It wasn't the biggest change, but it was a very significant change. And the first person was Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. And Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib was the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was known as the one of the toughest people of the Quraysh. Like, yes, this is the word, I think. Like, he was like one of the toughest of them, and people used to like fear him as well, like from his strength and from the way he was, subhanallah. So this is the first who became Muslim. And the second was, and before we mention the second, we have to say that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time, he used to make a specific supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he used to say, "Oh Allah, guide one of the two Omars to Islam." Like, there were two people called Omar that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam were supplicating for. He said, whoever of these two Omars, like of these two people who are called Omar, whoever of these two you like more, please guide him to Islam. And subhanallah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was referring to Abu Jahl, because Abu Jahl's name was Omar, and we mentioned like who he was. He was a leader of the Quraysh, and he was very cruel to the Muslims. But the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was like, if Islam erases what was before Islam, and him being a leader, he could help Islam, subhanallah. And the second person who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was supplicating for was Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh. And Umar at that time was not Muslim, and he was as well one of the toughest people of this area. Like, I think the toughest would be the title, subhanallah, for Umar radiallahu anh, if you hear his stories. And people were fearing him, and he was this guy who was not easily like frightened by people or something, and he was very straightforward. And we will see the straightforwardness, subhanallah, in a bit as well. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam supplicates. And now here we have to mention that there are multiple narrations explaining what happened and how Umar radiallahu anh became Muslim. Some of them differ because there is no authentic narration like that reaches the Sahih grade that explains the story how Umar radiallahu anh became Muslim. But all these stories that are weak, they have one thing in common. They say Umar radiallahu anh became Muslim because he heard the Prophet ﷺ reciting verses of the Quran, or in general, he heard the Quran being recited from a person of the Muslims. But yeah, there are different stories that it was through his sister, and he got angry at his sister, and he had to argue, and then he heard the Quran. And there is another story that he heard it from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Like we said, like the thing that is in all these different narrations is that he came to Islam because he heard the Quran being recited. And Allah alam, which of these stories is actually happened, but we know that he heard the Quran in a context, and this moved his heart, and he became Muslim, subhanallah. And after he became Muslim, especially after Umar became Muslim, and Hamza as well, but especially after Umar, the situations for the Muslim changed. The Muslims started showing themselves in public, started being able to do things that they were not be able, and they used to have a whole other experience, a significantly other experience than what they used to have before the conversion of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. And this is reflected in some of the sayings of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like the saying of Suhaib that when Umar radiallahu anh became Muslim, they were able to more openly call the people to Islam. Or the saying of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who said like, since Omar became Muslim, the Islam started to get a type of honor and pride like that it did not had like the Ummah of Islam, the people, the Muslims. They used to experience this kind of pride and honor that they were not used to experience to that extent before his conversion. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anh, he subhanAllah, he mentions as well something that where a story that we want to talk about, and that is the story that it was during the conversion or through the conversion of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, that the Muslims were able to pray in front of the Kaaba again, subhanAllah, because that was not easy. Imagine like with all this torture, everything going on, you going to the Kaaba and praying was a big risk, because this was the most sacred place to the leaders of the Quraysh. They were seeing themselves as the protectors of this house, and they were seeing that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is committing the highest form of blasphemy, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions. So going to the Kaaba was a no-go basically for the majority of the companions. And what happened is, subhanAllah, when Umar radiallahu anh, he became Muslim, something he said to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it was that he went to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and he said, aren't we on the truth? Aren't they on the falsehood? Aren't like we going to paradise? And if they die, they go to hellfire. Like he was very straightforward. Isn't this and that? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes. Like Umar, and subhanAllah, maybe like, what are you leading to? And then he says, why are we hiding then? Subhanallah. Like Umar was a very straightforward person. Like for him was, we are on the truth, why are we hiding then? And then it said that Umar radiallahu anh and Hamza, they went out with two groups of Muslims and they went to the Kaaba and started praying with the Kaaba. And the idolaters, like they could not see this. Like it was a view to them, seeing these two toughest people of their tribe praying in front of the Kaaba, and they knew like if we mess with them, it will end in a bloodbath, and we don't want that yet. Let's try to, like if it would be the weak ones, we could just eradicate them right now. But Omar and this other guy and the other people they have, it was like a horrible view to them, subhanAllah. And this happened through Omar radiallahu anh. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because of these attributes, he gave Omar radiallahu anh a special nickname, and he nicknamed him Al-Faruq. And Al-Faruq means, we know Omar Al-Faruq, like subhanAllah, was his full name with the nickname. Al-Faruq means something that separates, okay, something that separates. And he was called Al-Faruq because he separated between good and falsehood. And in the rhetoric of Omar radiallahu anh, even in future incidents, and we will mention these incidents, he uses always this rhetoric where he says like, aren't you on the truth? Aren't they on the falsehood? And aren't, like later in the wars as well, aren't our fallen in war in paradise, and aren't their fallen in war in the hellfire? Like he always speaks about, he always separates between the truth and falsehood. And subhanAllah, he was a very strong companion. Another narration that comes into my mind when I remember Omar radiallahu anh is the narration that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, Omar, whenever you're taking away, like you're walking in a way or something, the devil, the shaitan, he takes away like other than you. Like even, and this shows like how tough Umar radiallahu anh was, that even the devil, the shaitan, that is trying to influence and whisper to people to make them do bad things, he was scared of Umar radiallahu anh, and he used to take another way. This was Umar, subhanAllah, and his contributions to Islam were huge as well, and we will see in the Seerah, like there is a reason why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his closed circle were these people like Umar ibn Khattab, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and they have these nicknames as well. Subhanallah, Abu Bakr was called as-Siddiq. We will later know why he was given this nickname, that this meant the one who says the truth, the truthful. Uthman ibn Affan and Ali ibn Abi Talib, like these were the elite of the elite, basically, the ones that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well mentioned as being the best people after him. And we will see through these situations, like through these things that these people did. We mentioned some situations of Abu Bakr, how he supported Islam in the earliest days with any capabilities he had. And we mentioned some things about Omar, and we will mention things about Uthman and Ali as well that will show like these were very special people, subhanAllah. And all the companions were special. All the companions were special. But subhanAllah, there are differences between peoples. Like some people are more special than others, better than others through their taqwa, through their fearing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not all on the same level, but they were all very beautiful people, subhanAllah, that we can learn and be inspired from a lot. Like I mentioned, like this, if you want to go into this material, like through the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or even the biographies of his companions, there's an ocean that cannot be exhausted, like I said in the first episode of this series. But yeah, subhanAllah, this was the second migration to Abyssinia, and in the year after, the Islam of Umar radiallahu an, becoming Muslim, and Hamza radiallahu an, and this was like a minor victory amidst of all these hardship, subhanAllah. And it was not easy then. Like, don't think that after this everything became easy. Like Umar radiallahu an himself, the one I just mentioned, there is a narration where he had to hide in a house and he used to not come out. And subhanAllah, he was asked and he said, because I'm scared they want to kill me. Because a group of idolaters, they had collected themselves and they wanted to assassinate Omar. Like they wanted to kill him, and then as soon as he leaves his house, and he could not leave his house. Like imagine like how the situation would be if Omar, the guy who went in front of the Kaaba when he became Muslim, even he had to take sometimes a step back and be in his house, and then actually an idolater took him under his protection so he could leave the house again, subhanAllah. So this should not give the perception that everything became easy after, but it was a minor victory in the lines of the victories that were coming that we can celebrate, inshallah, as the Sahaba celebrated, because they felt that it was significant, like there was a significant difference before and after the Islam of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. And with that, Jazakumullah khair for watching. I really enjoyed it again. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I see you in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.